I paid my mother's mortgage for 5 years, but on my 38th birthday, the only gift my family gave me was a card that said, "Congrats on wasting another year." While they laughed at the joke, I realized I was done being their ATM, so I vanished without a word. And that's when their lives started to fall apart. I turned 38 the day I finally realized I wasn't a person to my family. I was just the human equivalent of a Roomba, background noise that kept their world clean, functional, and automated. My name is Owen. If you polled my loved ones for a one-word description of me, they'd probably go with reliable or the quiet one. Translation: the guy who never pushes back. And they were right. I was the king of swallowing my pride. I didn't say a word when my mother forgot my birthday 3 years running while I was busy wire transferring her mortgage payments. I didn't blow up when my younger brother Liam totaled my car and then had the audacity to ask if I'd pay his Uber home. I didn't even lose it when my wife Sarah accidentally invited her parents to live in our spare room for 2 months, rent-free, without asking me. I just nodded, tightened my jaw, and cleaned up the mess, both the literal wine stains on the carpet and the metaphorical wreckage of their lives. I was the fixer, the peacemaker, the designated adult in a room full of toddlers. My family had a specific brand of affection. They called it teasing, but it always felt more like they were checking for soft spots to sink the knife in. My mom loved to joke that I'd be absolutely helpless without her direction, ignoring the fact that I managed her entire financial life. My dad liked to pretend he couldn't remember what my degree was in because, in his words, "You're the one who spent 4 years and a fortune on something useless, right?" I'm the head of logistics for a major shipping firm, but to them, I was just a glorified mailman. Meanwhile, Liam, the golden boy with a real job in entry-level tech sales, never missed a chance to remind me how dynamic his career was compared to my boring office life. And Sarah? She was the worst of all. She didn't lead the charge, but she was always there in the front row, giggling along, never once standing up for the man who provided everything for her. You don't notice the structural integrity of your life failing until the ceiling starts hitting you in the head. For years, I gaslit myself. "They're just joking, Owen. You're being too sensitive. They love you in their own way." Then came my 38th birthday. We were at my parents' place. Same routine, same suffocating atmosphere. My mom made her signature lasagna, though she made sure to announce 3 times before the first bite that it was exhausting to cook for me and that she rarely had the energy for this much work anymore. I sat there nursing a glass of cheap red wine, watching them. My parents, Liam and his latest girlfriend, and Sarah. They were howling with laughter, trading inside jokes while I played the waiter, refilling water, passing the salt, making sure everyone had exactly what they needed. I didn't mind, or so I told myself. "All right, everyone," my mom chirped, clapping her hands like a manic game show host. "Time for gifts." I felt a small, pathetic spark of hope. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe they'd actually see me this time. She handed me a single, flimsy white envelope. No box, no wrapping paper, just a cheap, store-bought envelope. I opened it. Inside was a greeting card. The front featured a crude cartoon of a man slumped over a cluttered desk, looking gray and defeated. The text inside, written in bold, mocking font, simply said, "Congrats on wasting another year." I stared at it. I waited for the "just kidding" or the gift card to drop out. Nothing, just the card. Then the sound hit me. My mother's shrill, piercing laugh. My father's deep, booming chuckle. Liam snorting so hard he nearly choked on his wine. Even Sarah was doubled over, covering her mouth as she giggled. I don't get it," I muttered, looking up. "Oh, come on, Owen," my dad wheezed, wiping a tear from his eye. "It's a joke, look at his face, he's actually confused." "Yeah, lighten up, man," Liam added, slapping the table. "You're always so serious, someone had to say it. It's funny because it's true, right?" I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked at Sarah, expecting her to see the hurt in my eyes, but she just winked at me. "Don't be such a pill, babe. It's funny." I forced my lips into a shape that resembled a smile. "Yeah, good one," I said quietly. They laughed harder at that. I even joined in a little, a hollow, dry sound that felt like sandpaper in my throat as. What else could I do? I was the reliable one. I didn't make scenes. When the party ended, the shift happened instantly. My mom stood up, looked at the mountain of dirty plates, and sighed. "You've got this right, honey?" I'm just absolutely exhausted." She didn't wait for an answer. She just walked toward the living room to gossip with Liam. Sarah slipped on her jacket, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. "Don't take it so personally, Owen. They just like teasing you because you're such an easy target. I'll see you at home." She kissed my cheek, a cold, perfunctory habit, and walked out with the rest of them. And there I was, 10:30 p.m. on my 38th birthday. Standing alone in a kitchen that I paid for, elbow deep in greasy dishwater, while my family's laughter still echoed from the driveway. I stared at my reflection in the dark window above the sink. Is this it? The thought hit me with the force of a physical blow. Is this the rest of my life? Being the punchline for people who wouldn't even know how to turn on the dishwasher if I wasn't there to do it for them? I didn't have a cinematic breakdown. I didn't smash the plates. It was something much more terrifying. It was a quiet click inside my chest. A door in the back of my mind that had been propped open for decades simply drifted shut. A calm, icy voice in my head whispered, "You don't have to stay here." I finished the dishes. I dried my hands. I left the card on the counter, right where my mom would see it in the morning. The next morning, I woke up at 5 a.m., long before Sarah's alarm. I didn't pack a suitcase. That would be too obvious. I just made a cup of coffee, sat by the window, and watched the sun bleed over the horizon. For the first time in 38 years, the silence in the house didn't feel lonely. It felt like an exit strategy. The mattress shifted as Sarah finally stirred, the soft morning light highlighting the effortless way she occupied space, never once wondering if she was intruding. She let out a long, theatrical yawn and propped herself up on one elbow, squinting at me. "You okay? You've been acting all main character and quiet since the party last night." "I'm fine," I said. It was my programmed response, the verbal equivalent of a system update that never actually fixes the bugs. "God, you know they were just joking, right?" she said, rolling her eyes and reaching for her phone. "You always get so sensitive when they tease you. It's like you're looking for a reason to be a martyr." I nodded. "Yeah, I know, but I didn't know. Not anymore." The joke from the night before, that pathetic, cruel card, had acted like a chemical reagent, stripping away the protective layer of denial I'd worn for years. If the roles were reversed, if I had handed Liam a card mocking his failed ventures or laughed at my dad for his aging irrelevance, the sky would have fallen. If I had publicly humiliated Sarah, I'd be sleeping on the couch for a month. They didn't tease each other, they protected each other. But for me, it was always open season, and I was the only one not carrying a gun. Over the next week, I became an observer in my own life. It was like watching a movie with the director's commentary turned on. I noticed the way Sarah's eyes would glaze over or roll toward the ceiling the second I mentioned a logistical win at work. I saw how she'd forget to cook dinner, scrolling through TikTok until 8 p.m. because she just assumed I'd sigh and order a $60 Uber Eats spread. I watched my family take. They took, and not once did a thank you cross their lips. Not when I hauled Liam to the airport at 5 a.m. in a rainstorm, and certainly not when I spent my Sunday afternoon fixing my mom's Wi-Fi for the 10th time because she refused to learn how a router works. I was the family's utility bill, essential to keep the lights on, but something they groaned about paying attention to. The breaking point didn't happen at a dinner table, it happened in the hallway. I came home late, shoulders aching, and heard Sarah on the phone with her sister. They were howling. "Yeah, no, I'm serious. He actually thought we were going to get him something big this year," Sarah said, her voice dripping with that patronizing wife tone that kills a man's soul. "I told him to stop pouting. He's just so sensitive sometimes, it's exhausting to manage his moods." I froze in the doorway, my key still heavy in my hand. She didn't see me. She didn't even hear the door. I was so invisible to her that I didn't even register as a presence in my own home. I walked upstairs, skipped dinner, and sat on the edge of our bed in the dark. I stared at my hands. They were dry, the skin cracked around the knuckles from years of being the one who grabbed the wrench, the one who moved the boxes, the one who held everything together while everyone else played. I realized that none of them had ever truly looked at these hands. They only saw what the hands could do for them. A few days later, the phone buzzed. It was my mother. "Hey, honey," she chirped, her voice lacking even a hint of apology for the birthday debacle. "Can you swing by and look at the washing machine? It's making that weird clunking sound again. Probably just needs you to tinker with it." "Sure," I said. The word came out like a reflex, a ghost limb twitching. As I hung up, a physical sensation of nausea twisted in my gut. I was looking at my only day off in 3 weeks, and I was about to spend it providing free labor for people who treated my existence like a punchline. I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror, gray eyes, tired mouth, and asked out loud, "What the hell are you doing, Owen?" That question became an itch I couldn't scratch. That night, after Sarah's breathing leveled out into a deep sleep, I opened my laptop. I didn't have a master plan. I just had a frantic, claustrophobic need to be elsewhere. I started typing destinations into search bars like a man possessed. Denver, Lisbon, Tokyo. Then I saw it. Vancouver, mountains, water, and 3,000 miles of distance. A place where Owen wasn't synonymous with pushover. I clicked book flight. One way, 3 weeks out. The next morning, I felt light. I felt like I was walking on air. But as the days bled into weeks, the good son and good husband voices started screaming in my head. What if she notices? What if they find out? You can't just leave. But they made it so easy. Every day was a fresh reminder of why I was going. Liam mocked my boring logistics job again over a Sunday brunch I paid for. My mom made a comment about how I was losing my hair and my spark. Sarah laughed at every single jab. It was like they were collectively daring me to snap, never dreaming that when I finally did, I wouldn't do it with a shout, but with a disappearance. 3 weeks to the minute after booking that ticket, I packed a single suitcase. No dramatic exit, no screaming matches. I wrote a brief note, placed it on the granite countertop I had paid for in full, and walked out the door before the sun could catch me. My first night in Vancouver was spent in a sparse, cheap Airbnb. The silence was deafening but beautiful. I turned on my phone and watched the digital tidal wave hit. 20 missed calls, 10 texts, then the inevitable social media play. A post from Sarah featuring a photo of us from 3 years ago. "Please come home. We're so sorry. The house feels empty without you." Wait until you hear what happens next. But before we get to the most insane part of the story, make sure to subscribe to Reddit Echo and hit the bell icon. You don't want to miss the updates on this one. Let's get back to it. I stared at the glowing screen in the dark room. For the first time in my entire life, I didn't feel like the guy in the background. I didn't feel invisible. I felt like a ghost, and God, it was liberating. But freedom is a complicated thing. The people who spend years controlling you don't just let go because you moved zip codes. The next morning, the messages changed tone. Sarah went from worried to devastated to incensed. My mom started leaving voicemails about her blood pressure. Liam sent a text calling me a cowardly prick for leaving them in the lurch. I didn't answer. I didn't owe them a single keystroke. But I kept reading them, each one a tiny, jagged piece of evidence. Sarah's latest message was the masterpiece. "Owen, please call me. I'm really worried. We can talk about this. You just left without saying anything. Do you have any idea what this is doing to me?" I looked out the window at the Vancouver skyline, realizing that even in her apology, it was still all about her. I wasn't a husband to her. I was a utility that had suddenly been shut off, and she was just upset that she had to deal with the cold. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing this was for me?" Sarah's text screamed from the screen, the blue light of my phone illuminating the dark, unfamiliar corners of my Vancouver Airbnb. "Everyone is asking where you are. I've had to make up excuses." Then the anger started bleeding through. "This is so incredibly selfish, Owen. I can't believe you do this to your family." Then came the onslaught from my mother. Her messages were like heat-seeking missiles aimed directly at the guilt I'd been conditioned to feel since birth. "You can't just run away from your responsibilities, Owen. We all depend on you. Your father has been so upset he can't even eat. He's just staring at the wall." And then, the final blow, the one that used to always bring me to heel. "You're acting like a child. Come home right now and stop this nonsense." Liam's contribution was a classic piece of his brand. "Dude, grow up. Stop being a literal drama queen and get back here. Mom is losing it." It took every ounce of my willpower not to fire back a 1,000-word manifesto. I'd spent my entire adult life explaining myself to these people, carefully articulating why their words cut, why I was drowning, why I needed to be seen as a human being rather than a Swiss Army knife. and every single time they'd dismissed it as me overreacting or being too sensitive. I realized then that words were useless. They didn't speak my language, they only spoke the language of leverage. This time, their only response would be the deafening sound of my silence. The first week in Vancouver felt like a fever dream. I found a tiny studio apartment perched above a bustling coffee shop. The walls were paper thin, the heater rattled like a skeleton in a closet, and the streetlights outside flickered with a rhythmic, glitchy hum. But it was mine. For the first time in a decade, I wasn't walking on eggshells. I didn't have to brace myself for a critique on how I folded the laundry or a passive-aggressive sigh because I hadn't anticipated someone's needs. I could finally just breathe. I transitioned to remote work with my firm. They were surprisingly cool about the digital nomad pivot and spent my days alternating between shipping manifests and wandering the city. The air here was different. It smelled of salt, rain, and cedar. Strangers nodded at me on the sidewalk, and remarkably, not one person asked me to fix a washing machine or pay their mortgage. It was peace. But peace is a fragile thing when guilt is stitched into your marrow. Every vibration of my phone sent a jolt of cortisol through my chest. A pathetic, loyal part of me, the part that still craved the family I deserved rather than the one I had, kept hoping for a message that sounded like actual love. I wanted to see, "I finally get why you left. I'm so sorry for how we treated you." Instead, the messages devolved into pure, unadulterated manipulation. Sarah sent, "Your mom's been crying every night. Her eyes are swollen shut." My mom sent, "We're all so worried, Owen. Even Liam misses you." My dad finally chimed in with, "You've made your mother physically sick with stress. Are you happy now? Is this what you wanted?" It wasn't concern. It was a hostage negotiation where I was both the hostage and the ransom. By the second week, I'd had enough. I powered down the smartphone, tossed it into the back of a desk drawer, and bought a basic flip phone. I gave the new number only to my boss. Cutting the digital umbilical cord felt intoxicating. That was until one freezing Tuesday morning. I walked down to the cafe for my usual Americano, and there she was. Sarah was standing in the doorway, wrapped in the same crimson wool coat she'd worn for years, clutching her phone like a talisman. She looked frantic, her eyes darting across the room until they locked onto mine. "Owen?" she gasped, lunging toward me. My stomach didn't just drop, it felt like it hit the floor and shattered. "What the hell are you doing here, Sarah?" "I had to find you," she said, her voice ragged. "You just disappeared. You turned off your phone. We had to hire a private investigator, Owen. Do you have any idea how terrifying that was?" "That was the point," I said, my voice sounding flatter and colder than I'd ever heard it. "I didn't want to be found." Her eyes welled up with tears instantly. I watched them, wondering if they were a genuine byproduct of grief or a rehearsed tool for de-escalation. "I just want to talk, please. 5 minutes?" I hesitated, the old fixer urge screaming at me to comfort her, but I forced myself to gesture toward a small, wobbly table in the corner. 5 minutes, that's it." She sat, her hands trembling as she gripped her latte. "Your mom is a total wreck. Liam is furious, and I've been a ghost. I don't understand why you're doing this to us." "Stop," I said quietly. "This isn't about them." "What do you want, Sarah?" She blinked, clearly thrown by the lack of an apology. "I want you to come home. We can fix this. I'll make sure they back off. You've made your point, okay?" "You scared us. Message received." "My point?" I repeated, my pulse beginning to thrum in my ears. "You think this is a stunt? You think I uprooted my entire existence and flew across the country just to make a point like a teenager throwing a tantrum?" She opened her mouth to interrupt, but the dam finally broke. "You laughed at me, Sarah. You all did, for years. Every time I told you I was hurting, you told me I was overreacting. You sat there and watched them humiliate me on my own birthday, and you didn't just let it happen. You joined in. You didn't want a husband, you wanted a servant who was also a convenient punching bag." She sighed, crossing her arms over her chest, and that familiar condescending mask slid back into place. "See? This is exactly what I mean. You're being dramatic again. It was a joke, Owen. A stupid card. You're throwing away a marriage over a piece of stationery." Something inside me went stone cold. The last flickering ember of hope died right there between the sugar packets and the napkins. "I think we're done here," I said, standing up. She looked panicked now, realizing the script wasn't following her cues. Wait, Owen, please. Where are you going? I'm not coming back, Sarah. Her voice trembled, turning shrill. So that's it? You're just walking away from your family, from me, just like that? I'm walking away from people who only cared about me when I was useful, I said, looking her dead in the eye. There is a massive difference. She flinched as if I'd physically struck her. It was the first time I'd ever spoken the truth without sugarcoating it to protect her feelings. I turned and walked out of the cafe, the cold Vancouver air hitting my face like a benediction. That night, a final message bypassed my mental filters and hit my email. It was from Sarah. You'll regret this, Owen. You can't survive without us. I almost believed her for a second, but then a few days later, I received an email from my landlord back home that changed the entire game. The email from my former landlord hit my inbox like a bucket of ice water. Owen, we've been contacted by a woman claiming to be your wife. She's demanding your current address for an emergency medical verification. Should we confirm? My blood didn't just run cold. It turned to slush. The audacity of it, the sheer predatory persistence. Sarah wasn't just looking for closure in that cafe. She was hunting. I typed back with fingers that felt like lead. Do not share my location with anyone. Under any circumstances, contact the police if she persists. But the nightmare was only starting to peak. That same night, I saw 3 missed calls from my bank's fraud department. When I finally got a representative on the line, the news was a physical blow. Mr. Miller, we flagged an attempt to access your primary joint account using a secondary authorization request. Someone tried to reset the security credentials. My heart sank into the pit of my stomach. Sarah. She hadn't come to Vancouver to save our marriage. She'd come to inventory the assets. The next morning, the final veil of familial love was ripped away by an email titled, Urgent, Power of Attorney Inquiry. It was from a boutique law firm back home. They were following up on a request from my wife and mother to gain financial control over my estate, citing concerns regarding my mental capacity and sudden disappearance. The realization hit me like a high-speed freight train. They weren't worried that I was hurt. They weren't worried that I was lonely. They were terrified that the faucet had finally run dry. For years, I had been the family's private ATM. I was the one who was frugal so they could be free. I'd paid the down payment on Liam's car, covered a massive chunk of my mom's mortgage for 5 years, and wiped out Sarah's parents' credit card debt when they overextended on a cruise. I did it because I thought that's what a good man does. I thought loyalty was a currency that would eventually buy me respect. Now I realized I was just a line item in their budget, and without me, their house of cards was folding. I didn't even bother replying to the lawyer. I called my bank, scorched the earth by freezing every single joint account, and moved every cent of my personal savings into a new, ironclad account in Canada. When the last transfer was confirmed, I slumped onto the hardwood floor of my studio and laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was that jagged, hysterical laugh that comes after you've been punched so many times your nerves just stop reporting the pain. I wasn't the quiet fixer anymore. I was the ghost that had finally learned how to haunt. Then came the final straw, the moment that turned my lingering sadness into cold, hard tungsten. A week later, a plain manila package arrived. No return address. I opened it with trembling hands and felt the air leave my lungs. Inside was the birthday card, the same one. Congrats on wasting another year. But this time, there was a note tucked inside in my mother's elegant, looping cursive. You can't run from family, Owen. You'll always come back to us. We know who you are. It wasn't a plea. It was a taunt. It was a psychological leash being yanked. They were telling me that no matter how many miles I put between us, they still owned the rights to my soul. I didn't sleep that night. I paced the tiny apartment, the rattling heater providing a frantic soundtrack to my thoughts. I replayed every joke, every dismissive eye roll from Sarah, every time Liam called me a boring loser while spending my money. For the first time in my life, the reliable Owen was gone. I was purely, incandescently furious. I sat down at my laptop and began to build my own weapon. I started a folder titled Family Matters. I scanned the emails from the landlord, the fraud alerts from the bank, the predatory lawyer's inquiry, and the photos of that grotesque birthday card. I documented every cent I'd ever sent them, every mortgage payment, every loan that was never repaid. I didn't know how I'd use it yet, but I knew the quiet one was finished being silent. I thought they'd back off once they realized I'd cut the funds. Instead, they doubled down on the destruction. A few days later, my boss called me. "Hey, Owen," he said, his voice unusually strained. "Listen, I've been getting some concerning emails about you. I wanted to hear it from you first." "Emails? About what?" "They're from your brother, Liam. He's been messaging HR, claiming you've had a complete mental breakdown. He's saying you're unstable, potentially a risk to company data, and that the family is preparing to have you committed for your own safety." My stomach dropped into a dark, cold abyss. "He did what?" "I know it's bullshit, Owen," my boss said quickly. "You're the most level-headed guy on the payroll, but he's being persistent. He's trying to get you fired." I thanked him and hung up, my hands shaking with a terrifying mixture of fear and adrenaline. This wasn't just a toxic family dynamic anymore. This was a coordinated attempt to annihilate my life because they couldn't control it. This was punishment for the sin of wanting to be a person. I turned back to my computer screen. The Family Matters folder sat there, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. For decades, I had let them define me as the doormat, the helper, the guy who would always take the hit. They wanted a fight. They wanted to talk about mental instability and responsibility. Fine. I had 38 years of receipts, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to hit send. I wasn't the background noise anymore. I was the storm. I had the receipts. Decades of being the family ATM, the designated doormat, and the emotional punching bag were all laid out in digital ink. I had proof of their manipulation, their unhinged greed, and the casual cruelty that had been the soundtrack of my life. I knew exactly what I was going to do with that Family Matters folder. I was ready to scorched earth the whole situation. But before I could even click upload, one final message pinged on my phone, and it felt like a physical blow to the solar plexus. It was from Sarah. No words this time. Just a high-res photo of my parents' house. Parked right in the center of the driveway was a massive industrial-sized moving truck. Then came the follow-up text, dripping with venom. "If you won't come home and be a man, we'll make sure there's nothing left to come back to. Since you love your new life so much, we figured you wouldn't mind if we cleared out your junk." I froze. The phone felt slippery in my palm as the blood drained from my face. That house held everything I'd ever owned. My grandfather's old watch, my college yearbooks, the expensive tools I'd used to fix their houses for free, my entire library of books. It wasn't just about the property value anymore. They were trying to erase the physical evidence of my existence. They weren't just trying to control me. They were performing a digital and physical lobotomy on my past. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark of my studio, illuminated only by the cold blue light of that photo on my screen. My brain was a mess of denial. They wouldn't actually touch my things, I told myself. They wouldn't go that far. But the more I stared at the moving truck, the more I realized I was lying to myself. My family had always operated under a toxic, unspoken mandate. What's yours is ours, and what's ours is none of your business. They'd treated my life like a communal resource for years, but this hit differently. This wasn't a loan they'd never repay. This was a targeted strike. The next text from Sarah was the final nail. "You left all your stuff here, Owen. We're cleaning out the house today. It's not like you were planning to come back anyway. You did this to yourself. You did this to yourself." That sentence was a jagged piece of shrapnel that lodged itself in my brain, replaying on a sickening loop. According to them, choosing peace over psychological warfare was a crime, and this was my sentence. I wanted to scream until my lungs gave out. I wanted to call her and unleash every bit of vitriol I'd been suppressed for 20 years. But I didn't. I just put the phone face down on the floor, pressed my palms against my eyes until I saw stars, and let the silence swallow me. The next morning, I wandered down to the Vancouver harbor. The sky was a bruised, heavy gray, and the air was thick with the scent of salt and cedar. I watched the ferries cut through the morning mist, looking like ghost ships drifting into the unknown. And right there, with the cold wind biting at my face, I finally broke. I let myself cry. It wasn't just sadness, it was a deep, soul-crushing grief for the man I used to be. The guy who had tolerated the intolerable because he thought he was reliable. When you're gaslit for long enough, you start to believe you deserve the heat. You mistake the toxic voices of your family for your own internal monologue. But standing there, listening to the waves crash against the pier, I realized that the voice telling me I was worthless didn't belong to me. It belonged to them. And I didn't have to listen to it anymore. Something shifted in my chest. I couldn't change them. I couldn't force a group of narcissists to see my value or offer a genuine apology. But I could take the life they had mocked and turn it into something they could never touch. I started small that night. I made a list, not of revenge tactics, but of things for me. Not Owen the fixer, but Owen the human. Learn to cook something besides scrambled eggs. Hike a mountain. Make a genuine friend. Get a dog. The next morning, I walked into a local community kitchen for a cooking class. It was excruciatingly awkward at first. I was surrounded by strangers laughing and swapping stories while I stood over a cutting board, gripping a knife and chopping onions with the grim intensity of a man defusing a bomb. But by the end of the night, I'd produced a dish that was actually edible. When the instructor, a woman named Mia with a kind smile, walked by and said, "Nice work, Owen, you've got a real feel for this," I froze. I literally didn't know how to take a compliment. I just nodded, feeling a strange warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the stove. A few weeks later, I visited a rescue shelter and walked out with Rusty, a golden, scruffy mutt with floppy ears and a tail that never stopped wagging. He followed me into my studio and immediately claimed a spot on the rug. He didn't judge me, he didn't ask me for money, and he didn't laugh at my boring job. He just existed beside me, offering the kind of quiet, uncomplicated loyalty I'd spent 38 years searching for in humans. It was enough. My professional life started to mirror my personal one. Without the constant drain of family emergencies, my productivity skyrocketed. My boss noticed the new Owen and offered me a promotion, managing a massive logistics project for the Pacific Northwest. It was remote, it was high stakes, and it paid more than I'd ever made. For the first time, I wasn't working to pay off someone else's debt. I was working to build my own fortress. I started a new routine. Waking up at dawn, running through the park with Rusty, making a real breakfast, and logging onto my laptop with a panoramic view of the Vancouver skyline. The moving truck back home might have taken my old furniture and my childhood trophies, but they couldn't take this. I was finally building a world where the background noise was just the wind and the waves, and for the first time in my life, the silence was beautiful. Life in Vancouver wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful. And peace, I realized, was the most underrated kind of happiness. It wasn't the loud, performative joy my family used to chase at holiday dinners. It was the quiet absence of dread. Still, the old programming didn't just vanish. Guilt has a way of stitching itself into your bones, and occasionally it would ache. I'd be scrolling through social media and catch a glimpse of a happy family, some cousins at a backyard barbecue or a friend's birthday post, and that familiar toxic sting would return. A voice in my head would whisper that maybe I'd nuked my life too soon. Maybe if I just tried one more time, explained myself one more way, they would have finally seen me. But then, the memory of that birthday dinner would flood back. I'd see the smug grin on Liam's face, the sharp edge of my mother's laughter, and the way Sarah looked at me like I was a broken appliance. The guilt would evaporate, replaced by a quiet, icy certainty. They didn't lose me, they threw me away. They just didn't expect me to keep walking once I hit the trash heap. About 3 months into my new life, a notification popped up from Liam. The subject line was, "We need to talk." Against every survival instinct I had, I clicked it. "Hey bro, look, things got messy after you left. Mom's been really upset, like actually depressed. Dad says you've changed, that you're not the person we knew. Sarah's trying to move on, but it's hard on her. I don't know what your deal is, but this whole disappearing act was incredibly low. Family is supposed to stick together, Owen. Anyway, I wanted to let you know we sold Mom and Dad's place. We needed the cash to handle things since everything's been in limbo. Hope you're happy." No apology, no, "Are you okay?" No, "We were wrong." Just more blame, more gaslighting, and the news that they'd liquidated the family home, the place where my last remaining belongings had been stored, without a single word to me. I closed the laptop, my heart hammering a dull rhythm against my ribs. I grabbed Rusty's leash and headed out into the Vancouver evening. The city was draped in Christmas lights by then, the air crisp enough to sting my lungs. It felt grounding. I passed a small, independent bookstore, its windows glowing with a warm, amber light. A hand-lettered sign in the corner caught my eye. "It's never too late to start again." It felt like a message sent specifically to me from the universe. Inside, the shop smelled of old paper and peppermint. The owner, a man with silver hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen 1,000 stories, greeted me with a genuine smile. We ended up chatting for nearly an hour. When I mentioned that I'd loved writing when I was younger, before I became the logistics guy who fixed everyone's problems, he leaned over the counter. "Then write," he said simply. "The page doesn't care how long you've been away." That night, I opened a blank document. I didn't write about the Family Matters folder. I didn't write about revenge or the bank accounts or the moving truck. I wrote about the feeling of standing on the edge of a cliff and realizing that the wind wasn't there to push you off, it was there to catch you. Writing became my therapy. Every night after the logs were filed and Rusty was fed, I'd disappear into the screen for hours. I wrote about the strange, heavy calm that follows a Category 5 storm. I wrote about finding your own pulse after years of living for someone else's heartbeat. It didn't matter if the prose was purple or the metaphors were clunky. It was mine. It was the only thing they couldn't sell or mock. As the months passed and the Vancouver snow melted into a vibrant, wet spring, I felt myself coming back to life in color. My colleagues noticed it too. I wasn't the timid yes man in the corner of the Zoom calls anymore. I started pitching bold strategies and standing my ground on budget cuts. The first time my boss laughed at one of my jokes during a meeting, it felt like a weird kind of validation. But this time, it wasn't a desperate craving for love. It was just the sound of a healthy professional relationship. Then, on a Tuesday evening in early April, my phone buzzed with an unrecognized number. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but some lingering thread of the old Owen made me pick up. Owen? It was my mother. Her voice sounded thin, fragile, like dry parchment. "It's me," she said softly when I stayed silent. "I know you don't want to talk. I know you're angry. But I wanted you to know your father had a heart attack." I felt my chest tighten, a reflexive spasm of the old duty. "Is he?" "He's alive," she said quickly, though her voice cracked. "But it's been so hard, Owen, the stress, the move, the everything. I just thought you should know. We've been through so much." I sat on my sofa, Rusty's head resting on my knee, and waited for the wave of crushing guilt to pull me under. But it never came. I felt a distant pity, the kind you feel for a stranger in a news report, but that was it. "I miss you," she whispered after a long pause. "We all do. Everything is so quiet without you." "Do you?" I asked, my voice steady and quiet. "Do you actually miss me, Mom? Or do you just miss what I did for you? Do you miss the mortgage payments and the free repairs and the person who let you use him as a punchline so you could feel better about yourselves?" "That's not fair, Owen," she sniffed. "Families fight. It's what we do. That doesn't mean we stop loving each other." "Maybe," I said. "But love without respect is just possession. You didn't love me. You loved the convenience of me. You made a joke out of my life, and now that I've stopped letting you, you're trying to make me the villain for surviving." She began to cry, that soft, manipulative sob I'd heard 1,000 times before. "If you ever decide to come home, I am home," I interrupted. The line went silent. I could hear her sharp intake of breath. After a long, heavy moment, she whispered, "Goodbye, Owen. Goodbye, Mom." I hung up and stared at the phone. I felt empty, but it wasn't the emptiness of loss. It was the emptiness of a clean slate. That was the last time I heard her voice. In the months that followed, the momentum of my new life became unstoppable. My writing evolved from therapeutic rambles into actual short stories and essays. I submitted one to a major digital literary journal on a whim, and a week later, I got the email. They were publishing it. The editor even asked if I'd consider a regular freelance column. I looked out my window at the mountains. The same ones I dreamed about when I was trapped in that house of mirrors. For the first time in 38 years, I wasn't the background noise. I wasn't the fixer. I was the author of my own story, and for once, the ending was up to me. Rusty became my constant companion, a silent, furry anchor in the swirling sea of my new life. He followed me to every rain-slicked cafe, lying patiently under my desk while I hammered out logistics or worked on my stories, his chin resting on my foot. Sometimes, as I watched the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest, I'd be struck by the raw purity of his loyalty. He didn't give a damn about my bank balance, my career trajectory, or whether I was useful. He just wanted to be near someone who saw him as more than furniture. That kind of simplicity started to feel like the ultimate freedom, a luxury my family could never afford because they were too busy counting everyone else's change. I wasn't a millionaire, I wasn't a celebrity. But for the first time in 39 years, I was content. I had a life that fit me like a well-worn jacket, something my family, in all their grasping, miserable entitlement, never managed to achieve. But the universe has a way of testing a man's peace. About a year after I vanished into the Vancouver mist, the digital ghost of my past came knocking. I sat down at my desk with a coffee, and there it was, a fresh email. No sender name, just a string of numbers and a scanned PDF attachment. I stared at the glowing screen in the dark room. For the first time in my entire life, I didn't feel like the guy in the background. I didn't feel invisible. I felt like a ghost, and God, it was liberating. But freedom is a complicated thing. The people who spend years controlling you don't just let go because you moved zip codes. The next morning, the messages changed tone. Sarah went from worried to devastated to incensed. My mom started leaving voicemails about her blood pressure. Liam sent a text calling me a cowardly prick for leaving them in the lurch. I didn't answer. I didn't owe them a single keystroke. But I kept reading them, each one a tiny, jagged piece of evidence. Sarah's latest message was the masterpiece. "Owen, please call me. I'm really worried. We can talk about this. You just left without saying anything. Do you have any idea what this is doing to me?" I looked out the window at the Vancouver skyline, realizing that even in her apology, it was still all about her. I wasn't a husband to her. I was a utility that had suddenly been shut off, and she was just upset that she had to deal with the cold. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing this was for me?" Sarah's text screamed from the screen, the blue light of my phone illuminating the dark, unfamiliar corners of my Vancouver Airbnb. "Everyone is asking where you are. I've had to make up excuses." Then the anger started bleeding through. "This is so incredibly selfish, Owen. I can't believe you'd do this to your family." Then came the onslaught from my mother. Her messages were like heat-seeking missiles aimed directly at the guilt I'd been conditioned to feel since birth. "You can't just run away from your responsibilities, Owen. We all depend on you. Your father has been so upset he can't even eat. He's just staring at the wall." And then, the final blow, the one that used to always bring me to heel. "You're acting like a child. Come home right now and stop this nonsense." Liam's contribution was a classic piece of his brand. "Dude, grow up. Stop being a literal drama queen and get back here. Mom is losing it." It took every ounce of my willpower not to fire back a 1,000-word manifesto. I'd spent my entire adult life explaining myself to these people, carefully articulating why their words cut, why I was drowning, why I needed to be seen as a human being rather than a Swiss Army knife. And every single time they'd dismissed it as me overreacting or being too sensitive. I realized then that words were useless. They didn't speak my language, they only spoke the language of leverage. This time, their only response would be the deafening sound of my silence. The first week in Vancouver felt like a fever dream. I found a tiny studio apartment perched above a bustling coffee shop. The walls were paper thin, the heater rattled like a skeleton in a closet, and the streetlights outside flickered with a rhythmic, glitchy hum. But it was mine. For the first time in a decade, I wasn't walking on eggshells. I didn't have to brace myself for a critique on how I folded the laundry or a passive-aggressive sigh because I hadn't anticipated someone's needs. I could finally just breathe. I transitioned to remote work with my firm. They were surprisingly cool about the digital nomad pivot and spent my days alternating between shipping manifests and wandering the city. The air here was different. It smelled of salt, rain, and cedar. Strangers nodded at me on the sidewalk, and remarkably, not one person asked me to fix a washing machine or pay their mortgage. It was peace. But peace is a fragile thing when guilt is stitched into your marrow. Every vibration of my phone sent a jolt of cortisol through my chest. A pathetic, loyal part of me, the part that still craved the family I deserved rather than the one I had, kept hoping for a message that sounded like actual love. I wanted to see, "I finally get why you left. I'm so sorry for how we treated you." Instead, the messages devolved into pure, unadulterated manipulation. I liked the way she said "we." Step 1 was a surgical strike, a formal response that dismantled every single lie in Sarah's claim with cold, hard documentation. Lynn helped me file a countersuit for legal harassment, misuse of marital assets, specifically the funds Sarah had drained before I froze the accounts, and intentional infliction of emotional distress, all backed by the Family Matters folder. Step secondary was the scorched earth phase. We secured every single one of my Canadian assets, updated my legal identity protections, and prepared a discovery request that would force Sarah and my family to account for every cent of mine they had spent over the last 5 years. As I walked out of Lynn's office into the cool Vancouver air, I realized the quiet one was officially dead. I had spent my life as a peacemaker in a family that only valued war. If they wanted to play the abandonment card, they were about to find out exactly how much it cost to lose the only person who actually cared about them. This wasn't just a defense anymore, it was my final declaration of independence. I moved with a precision that bordered on surgical. Step 2 of my liberation meant scrubbing my life of their toxic fingerprints once and for all. I finalized my residency status in Canada, moved every cent of my hard-earned savings into private accounts they couldn't even find, and systematically stripped my name from every remaining shared asset. This included the house Sarah was still living in, the one I'd bought, the one she'd treated like a prize. Bank records revealed the ugly truth. She hadn't paid a single mortgage installment since the day I vanished. She was literally squatting in my property, enjoying the roof I provided while simultaneously suing me for emotional distress. The hypocrisy was so thick I could practically taste it. My blood didn't boil this time. It just turned to ice. Step 3 was the pro-revenge phase. It was time to let the truth do the heavy lifting. I didn't blast them on social media like a scorned teenager. Instead, I went for the jugular, their reputations. I reached out to Liam's HR department, the very same people he had tried to poison against me. I didn't send a screaming manifesto. I sent a professional, itemized, formal complaint. I included time-stamped screenshots of his attempts to sabotage my career and his blatant lies about my mental health. I didn't demand he be fired. I just wanted them to be aware of his extracurricular activities. Then I turned my gaze towards Sarah. She worked as a counselor at a prestigious private school where image and integrity were the only currencies that mattered. I sent a quiet, scanned copy of that fraudulent power of attorney request she and my mother had tried to file behind my back. My message to the administration was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive professionalism. This document was submitted without my consent or knowledge. I am clarifying the matter to ensure there is no confusion regarding my legal status. I let that ticking clock sit in their inbox and went back to my life. In the quiet intervals, I kept writing. I pitched a piece to a local literary magazine, a raw, fictionalized account of a man escaping a cult of personality disguised as a family. It wasn't flashy or laden with flowery metaphors. It was a gut punch of honesty. When it hit the stands, I didn't expect much. But then the messages started pouring in. Strangers from all over the world reached out telling me that my words felt like their own lives. They thanked me for giving them a voice. It was the most profound validation I'd ever received. Better than any birthday card, better than any thank you my family had ever withheld. As the hearing date loomed, Lynn informed me that Sarah's lawyer was suddenly desperate to settle. They wanted me to panic, to fold under the pressure of the impending court date. But I'd learned the power of silence. I didn't respond to their frantic emails. I let the silence stretch until it became a physical weight. 2 weeks before the court date, a message popped up from a name I hadn't seen in years. Amanda, Sarah's sister. We had never been close. She was always the quiet observer, the one who looked at me with a mix of pity and distance during family dinners. Owen, her message began. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I saw the court filings. I also saw what you sent to the school. I just wanted you to know, not everyone thinks you're the bad guy. I saw what they did to you for years. I admired how much you put up with, even if I never said it. I hope you're okay. Don't let them pull you back in. You don't owe them anything. You don't owe them anything. The words hit me like a revelation. I stared at the screen for an hour, letting that sentence sink into my skin. A few days later, the fallout began. Liam's company announced a restructuring and a round of internal ethics investigations. His name wasn't in the memo, but a former colleague sent me a screenshot of his LinkedIn profile. His job title was gone. He was open to work. Sarah's tone shifted instantly. The legal threats vanished, replaced by pitiful, sniveling requests. "We can drop all of this, Owen. Please, just talk to me. Why are you doing this? You're ruining everything. You've changed so much, I don't even know you." She was right. I had changed. The old Owen, the one who would have felt a pang of guilt at her crumbling life, was dead and buried. The new Owen understood that I hadn't ruined anything. I had simply stopped being the glue that held their delusions together. I wasn't the villain. I was just the guy who stopped paying the villain's bills. My revenge wasn't loud or dramatic. It was strategic. The best revenge is living a life so good that their absence is the best part of it. But I still had one final card to play. I wasn't just going to win a lawsuit, I was going to ensure they could never reach for me again. I needed to return home. Not to stay, not to fix anything, but to look them in the eye. I wanted them to see exactly what a man looks like when he finally stands up and walks out of the shadows. The flight back was the quietest 5 hours of my life. My hands didn't shake. My chest didn't tighten. There was only a cold, crystalline resolve. I wasn't a son returning to the fold or a husband returning to a wife. I was a stranger coming back to collect the final pieces of a life I had already outgrown. I was the ghost coming back to haunt the people who thought they could kill me. The plane touched down with a jolt that reverberated through the cabin, but the only thing I felt was a cold, crystalline focus. Stepping into the terminal, I could already sense that familiar, suffocating heaviness in the air, the atmospheric pressure of the life I'd left behind, trying to pull me back into its gravity. For 38 years, I had been the background noise, the resident fixer, the man who smoothed over every wrinkle until his own identity was ironed out. But as I walked toward the exit, I realized that old version of Owen hadn't just left the building, he had been cremated. Lynn met me at the courthouse 2 days later. The morning sun was sharp, glinting off the stone pillars of the building. She looked at me, her eyes searching for any sign of the sensitive man Sarah had described in her filings. "Are you ready for this, Owen?" she asked, her voice steady. "They're going to try to get under your skin." "I've never been more ready for anything in my life," I replied. I wasn't shaking. My chest didn't feel tight. I felt like a man walking into a room to turn off a light that had been left on for too long. We walked into the courtroom and the air shifted immediately. Sarah was already there, huddled with her lawyer, a slick, over-caffeinated man in a tailored suit who radiated the kind of arrogance that only comes from thinking you're the smartest person in every room. Sarah looked polished, but it was a brittle kind of beauty. The dark circles under her eyes were poorly hidden by concealer, and she refused to even glance in my direction. In the back row, my family sat like a jury of my peers. My mother was whispering frantically into my father's ear. He looked smaller, more withered than I remembered. And then there was Liam, leaning back with a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. He still thought this was a show he was directing. He still thought he was the protagonist. The judge called the session to order, and the air grew still. Sarah's lawyer led the charge launch into a theatrical monologue. It was the same tired Reddit tier drama. I was the heartless husband who had abandoned his loyal wife, inflicted irreparable emotional harm, and maliciously withheld marital assets. He spoke with a practiced, stag-like confidence, punctuating his lies with dramatic pauses. When he finished, he threw a smug, "Checkmate" look my way. Then Lynn stood up. She didn't need the theatrics. Her power came from the weight of the facts she was about to drop like lead weights. "Your Honor," she began, her voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. "My client did not abandon his marriage. He escaped a meticulously documented pattern of sustained psychological manipulation and predatory financial exploitation. And unlike the plaintiff, We aren't here to offer anecdotes. We're here to offer proof." She handed a thick folder to the judge. Inside was the Family Matters archive, the power of attorney requests filed in secret, the flagged bank access attempts, the frantic, abusive emails, and the screenshots of Liam's attempt at corporate sabotage. But the centerpiece was a high-resolution print of the birthday card. The judge's brow furrowed as he looked at the cartoon of the defeated man and the words, "Congrats on wasting another year." "This was for his birthday?" the judge asked, his voice dropping an octave. "Yes, Your Honor," Lynn said, her tone icy. "Signed and gifted to him by every person sitting at that table, including his spouse, while he paid the mortgage on the house they sat in. It was the beginning of a coordinated effort to break my client's spirit so they could continue to treat him as a personal bank account." A quiet, horrified murmur rippled through the gallery. Sarah's lawyer jumped up, shouting about relevance and character assassination, but the judge silenced him with a sharp wave of his hand. "It speaks directly to the intent and the documented pattern of behavior. I'll allow it." Then came the audio. Lynn played the clips one by one. My mother's shrill, manipulative voicemails, Sarah's cold, calculated threats, and finally, Liam's voice echoing through the courtroom speakers as he dictated the email to my HR department. "Owen's been acting unstable. I think you should keep an eye on him for the safety of the company." The silence that followed was deafening. Liam visibly wilted, sinking lower into his mahogany bench. My father turned to look at his youngest son, and for the first time I saw a flicker of genuine realization in his eyes, the dawning horror of what he had allowed his family to become. By the time Lynn sat down, the case hadn't just flipped, it had been demolished. The judge leaned back, his gaze fixed sternly on Sarah. "Mrs. Miller," he said, "do you have anything at all to add to this?" Sarah's hands were shaking so violently, she had to tuck them under the table. I just wanted him to come home," she stammered, her voice cracking. "I thought if I filed something, he'd have to talk to me. I didn't think—" "That is not what the legal system is for, ma'am," the judge snapped. "This case was clearly filed in bad faith, bordering on a criminal misuse of this court. I am dismissing all claims with prejudice. Furthermore, I am awarding full damages and all legal costs to the defendant." Sarah's lawyer tried to sputter a protest, but the judge cut him off with a look that could have curdled milk. "You're lucky I'm not sanctioning your client for harassment right now. We are adjourned." It was over. The legal tether was cut. But the real closure didn't happen in front of a bench. It happened on the courthouse steps. Outside, the air was cool, but the sun felt warm on my back. My family stood clustered together like a cornered, confused pack of wolves who had forgotten how to hunt. My mother was the first to approach, her face a mask of wounded pride. "Owen," she said, her voice trembling with a rehearsed fragility, "you didn't have to do all this. You didn't have to humiliate us like that." "I didn't do anything, Mom," I said, looking her directly in the eyes. "I just finally told the truth. If the truth is humiliating, that's on you." "People will talk," she hissed, her concern for appearances finally winning out over her fake grief. "The neighbors, the church, everyone will know." "Good," I replied. "Maybe then you'll stop pretending that treating me like a subhuman servant was normal. Maybe you'll finally have to look at yourselves." My father, who had been an ornamental figure in my life for as long as I could remember, finally stepped forward. "You could have handled this privately, son. You didn't have to go for the throat." I looked at him, really looked at him, for a long, silent moment. "You never did anything privately, Dad. You mocked me in front of everyone for years. You made me the punchline of every dinner, every holiday, every milestone. The only difference today is that this time, someone was actually listening, and they didn't find the joke very funny." He opened his mouth to deliver one last platitude, one last tease, but for the first time in 39 years, no words came out. He just stood there, a small man in a large suit, realizing that the background noise had finally stopped. And in its place was a silence he would have to learn to live with. Then Liam stepped forward, his face contorted with a sneer that didn't quite mask the desperation underneath. The golden boy was tarnished, and he knew it. "You think you're better than us now, don't you?" he spat, his voice cracking with a mix of fury and disbelief. "You're pathetic, Owen. You're a coward who ran away from his own blood. You think a judge's ruling makes you a man?" I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel that frantic need to defend myself. I didn't feel the heat rise in my neck. I just felt a profound, weary pity. I offered him a small, tired smile, the kind you give a child who's throwing a fit over a toy that was never theirs to begin with. "No, Liam," I said, my voice calm and steady in the crisp afternoon air. "I don't think I'm better than you. I just stopped letting you and Mom define what family means. I'm not running away from anything. I'm walking toward a life where people like you don't get a vote." He scoffed, muttering a string of bitter insults under his breath as he turned on his heel. My mother followed him, her hand gripping my father's arm so tightly her knuckles were white, dragging him away like a silent accessory to her wounded pride. They didn't look back. They couldn't. Sarah stayed for a moment longer. The polished, perfect wife facade had completely disintegrated. Her eyes were bloodshot, her mascara smudged into dark streaks down her cheeks. She looked at me, and for a second I saw the woman I thought I'd married before the greed and the family pressure turned her into someone I didn't recognize. "I didn't want it to end like this," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant hum of city traffic. "Neither did I, Sarah," I replied, and I meant it. "But you made your choice. You made it the moment you decided that love was just another form of leverage to use against me." She reached out, her fingers twitching as if to touch my arm, one last attempt at a physical tether. I stepped back, creating a deliberate, final chasm of space between us. "Goodbye, Sarah." She nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on her face. Then she turned and walked away into the shadows of the courthouse pillars without another word. I stood there on the steps for a long time, watching them disappear. I felt the weight of a decade, the constant vigilance, the suppressed anger, the crushing sense of duty simply lift off my shoulders. The air felt cleaner, lighter, as if a storm had finally passed and scrubbed the world raw. Over the next few months, the fallout of their own making unfolded with a quiet, poetic justice. Sarah's school, obsessed with its reputation for moral guidance, reviewed the power of attorney documents and the evidence of her financial fraud. They decided that a woman who tried to covertly seize her husband's life while he was still breathing wasn't exactly the right fit for counseling impressionable students on ethics. She was quietly asked to resign. Liam's situation was even more clinical. His company's internal investigation into his integrity concerns and his blatant attempt to use corporate channels for personal sabotage led to the immediate termination of his contract. The sales superstar was suddenly a liability. My parents, stripped of the illusion of being the respectable pillars of the community they once pretended to be, withdrew into a bitter, self-imposed exile. The social circles that once fueled their egos no longer wanted to associate with the family whose dirty laundry had been aired in a public record. And me? I went back to Vancouver. I went back to the rain, to the mountains, and to Rusty, who greeted me at the door with a wagging tail that felt like a hero's welcome. I returned to my small apartment above the coffee shop, to the routine that had rebuilt my soul piece by piece. But this time, I wasn't a ghost. I wasn't hiding. I used a portion of the settlement money to launch a dedicated platform, a blog and a digital community focused on family boundaries, emotional recovery, and the grueling process of rebuilding an identity after escaping a narcissist's shadow. It gained traction with a speed that shocked me. I wasn't just shouting into the void, I was a lighthouse. Thousands of messages poured in from the quiet ones, the doormats, the fixers, the black sheep, thanking me for giving a name to the invisible chains they'd been wearing for years. 6 months later, a major publisher reached out. They wanted to turn the blog into a book. I spent my nights writing, not out of a need for revenge, but out of a need for truth. When the book was released, it wasn't just a career milestone. It was a manifesto. It gave people permission to see their sensitivity not as a weakness to be mocked, but as a compass to be followed. One rainy Tuesday, a year after the trial, I found a plain envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single cream-colored card. It wasn't a cartoon this time. It was blank, with 4 words written in that familiar, elegant, looping cursive. "We're proud of you." No signature. No apology for the birthday card, the moving truck, or the lawsuit. No ownership of the wreckage they'd caused. Just 4 words designed to pull me back in, to make me feel that old, desperate need for their approval. I stared at the card for a long time, feeling the ghost of the man who would have cried tears of joy at those words. Then, I felt the man I had become. I realized that forgiveness doesn't always require a seat at the table. Sometimes forgiveness is just realizing you don't need their table anymore. I tore the card in half, then into quarters, and dropped it into the trash. The book was closed. The ink was dry. On my 40th birthday, I didn't sit at a table being mocked. I hiked a steep, rugged trail overlooking the Vancouver skyline. The sun was dipping below the horizon, hemorrhaging brilliant shades of violet, orange, and gold across the water. Rusty sat beside me, his fur glowing in the twilight, his tail thumping lazily against the dirt. I took a deep, lung-filling breath and laughed. It wasn't the forced, polite chuckle I'd used to deflect insults at family dinners. It was a real, deep-chested laugh that echoed off the trees. I thought about that card from 2 years ago, the one that mocked me for wasting another year. I smiled. I hadn't wasted a single thing. I had survived the demolition and used the rubble to build a cathedral. I reached into my pack, pulled out my notebook, and scribbled the final line for my next manuscript. The one that would tell the world what happens after the quiet ones stop waiting for permission to exist. The quiet ones aren't weak. They are simply the architects of their own silence, waiting for the moment they no longer need to speak to be heard. I closed the notebook, looked out at the infinite horizon, and whispered 4 words to the wind, not for my mother, not for Sarah, and not for Liam. I am finally free.
Thank you for staying with me until the end. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for my channel. Your support means everything. See you in the next one.